you both, our producer Cam, listen to your big homie Ken. Please put money on Alabama making the playoff. Please, please, please put some money on it. And in December, when Alabama makes the playoff, you'll be able to take that money and buy something nice around Christmas time for your husband, wife, son, daughter, cousin, nephew, niece, whoever it is. This is free money. And then come back, call the hotline, and thank your big homie Ken for making you some money on the college football pregame.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Until Saturday, the Athletics College Football Podcast. I am your host, David Ubben. I am here, of course, with two fantastic co-hosts, the spectacularly named Kennington Smith III, our Alabama beat writer. Kenny, how you doing today?
All good. Beautiful day in Tuscaloosa. I'm fresh off the practice field, so I'm excited to be here and to get some takes off.
I did apologize to Kenny for preventing him from taking a shower because me personally, I've covered teams, I've covered preseason camp, and when you're out sitting there sweating, as long as you are, watching windows, whether it be 15 minutes or 150 minutes, it gets hot out there. Also joining us, Audrey Snyder, covers Penn State from State College, Pennsylvania. Audrey, thanks for being on the show.
Happy to be here. What's it like to cover 105 minutes of practice? I think I've only ever seen that once.
When I was very first starting out, I was covering Missouri, and they opened up all of their spring practices and all of their preseason camp, which sounds great, but then I'm waking up at 6 a.m. and trudging to the practice field for an hour and a half, 2 hours, for practice that starts at 6:30. And the problem is that it's cold when you get there, so you need like a coat, and then by 8:30, you're like dripping in sweat, and then you're standing around doing interviews. It was every practice sounds great. We can talk about practice access another time. I would not like for every practice to be open, but a little more would be nice. I think the sport would benefit from that. But it is what it is, I guess.
Happy to be here.
Well, today we are on the trading floor. We're going to talk buying and selling programs. It will bring echoes of the Mad Money show, which I actually only sort of have a reference for through Arrested Development and their constant temperature checks of the Bluth family company stock. So I didn't watch the show itself, but of course, Jim Cramer, sort of one of those things that is ever present. So we're going to be talking about college football programs that we are buying and selling at the moment. If you aren't already, follow us and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, whatever podcast platform you listen to, whether you're driving, working out, investing yourself, taking Jim Cramer's advice. If you're watching us on YouTube, leave us a like. Subscribe to our channel. We've got 9,000 subscribers. We just passed that number. We're trying to get to 10K. We're going to try to hit that by the time the season kicks off. The links to the YouTube channel, the Until Saturday newsletter, and any stories we're going to reference on today's show will be found in the show's description. But before we get into buy, sell, hold, all that stuff, it is fall camp. Right before we started, a little bit of breaking news. Texas running back CJ Baxter suffered a knee injury. He is out for the season. It always happens once or twice in preseason camp that a really good player just doesn't get to play that season, and then that's always tough to see. Texas already without Jonathan Brooks, and now he's off to the NFL, and now CJ Baxter out as well. That's going to be a little bit of a juggling job there. We'll talk about some more injuries a little bit later. We do have some Texas conversation coming up, but first, let's check in with Audrey and the Big Ten's favorite unfortunate second-class citizen, only because Ohio State and Michigan have ruled the league, and the question has always been, can Penn State crack into that upper echelon? And the good news for them now is that USC and Oregon and Washington are joining the league. Audrey, what have you made of camp so far? What has stood out to you? And we'll talk a little bit more Nittany Lions here shortly.
Yeah, Penn State's like a week into it right now. They open up at West Virginia, which we will get into in a bit, Ubben, because that is going to be a really good game. To me, the biggest thing so far that stood out is you look at the Penn State offense, right? Andy Kotelnicki coming here from Kansas, the OC. Is Drew Aller? Is Nick Singleton? What about Katron Allen, Julian Fleming, right? This whole revamped offense, is it looking okay? Well, based off of the snippets we've seen, again, we're talking like 15-minute windows, a lot of ball security drills. They look pretty good, But the thing that catches my eye is Andy Kotelnicki's energy, right? And the way that players have bought into it. He's put a real emphasis on developing leadership, making Drew Aller more vocal, which is happening. But I think the creativity is there, right? Like this is an offense on paper that has a lot of talent, but they just have to be able to tap into it, which we did not see last year. So that's kind of the offense has been the focal point in trying to figure out what do they have in this receiving core? Trey Wallace is healthy, which is probably going to be their number one receiver. I would say Julian Fleming's probably their number two. But again, it's like, it feels like Groundhog Day here, Ubben, where we don't know what the receiving core is going to look like. We're not sure about the quarterback and the offense, but the defense will be really good yet again.
I am concerned about the receivers being able to get open, but I think the question that we won't really have an answer to until we get into the season is how much of the disasters against Ohio State and Michigan and an offense that couldn't move, how much of that is receiver talent and some of that's turned over we've seen, and how much of that is schematics and how much of that is Drew Aller processing. We'll see. We'll see. I did like the Andy Kotelnicki hire. I thought that was on the short list of best OC hires that we saw. I like the Colin Klein hire at Texas A&M as well. But Kotelnicki's on the short list there, so we'll see kind of what that impact is. Bottom line, where does this team finish for you, Audrey, in yards per play nationally?
Well, after last year,
top 40.
Are we gonna get the chuck it deep clip? Are we gonna run that back?
If they do chuck it deep, I feel good about their odds.
They're gonna have to, right? Like, there it is on cue. I mean, they're gonna have to, and I think by the end of the year, I firmly believe, and we'll get into this a little bit more, I think this is going to be like a top 15 offense. And I think, again, as good as they were last year defensively, they just needed a competent offense, and they couldn't even get that. But I do think like it's a complete overhaul in that regard, right? Like you're going to have to let Drew Aller make some mistakes and be willing to live with that. Where last year he looked like they were afraid to push the ball down the field, and they were. But yeah, to your point, David, I think a lot of it was the scheme last year. A lot of it was the receiving core, and quite frankly, they just were not good enough. And part of it was a first-year starting quarterback. Well, it's already Drew Aller's junior year now. Somehow we've gotten here right after a year behind Sean Clifford. And it's time to figure out what in the world he is and what in the world this offense is.
75th in yards per play last year. If they can finish top 25, I like them to get in the playoff. Top 40, they might be sweating on Selection Sunday. Or are we?
What do we call that?
We'll have to figure out if we're just going to co-opt these, because like I don't. We've sort of called it Selection Sunday, but the branding is not as strong. Kenny, Alabama. Probably the biggest wild card in college football this year. Time will tell whether or not, to quote the great Lupe Fiasco, if the show goes on or if we have something new altogether that people are not going to love. You've been on the ground. You were there last year for Nick Saban's final season at Alabama. Didn't quite get the farewell tour that people might have suspected we could get at one point. Very sudden exit. Now that fall camp's open, you can feel the season creeping close. What's been the biggest difference that you've seen?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring up Lupe Fiasco, because the first thing that you notice, in addition to the fact that we get a chance to view practice, which wasn't the case in the Saban regime, that there's music at practice now. So that's the first big thing that you notice if you're ever driving past the football facility. You kind of hear music blasting. So haven't heard any Lupe Fiasco yet. A lot of Earth, Wind & Fire, a lot of Michael Jackson, a lot of current rap music, but none of that. So I'm gonna have to send in a suggestion for that, because I do like him as an artist.
Mid 2000s hip hop, we got to.
Right, exactly. I think the biggest thing is just if you look at last year's fall camp, the biggest storyline, and it was one of the biggest storylines in college football, was what is happening with Alabama's quarterback situation. I feel like that battle kind of carried the juice throughout fall camp, and then obviously it kind of carried into the season. There really isn't a big position battle storyline on Alabama's team this year. I mean, they're going to have to replace some guys in the secondary. They're going to have to replace some guys up front. But that's no different at Alabama like it is in any top-tier program. Top-tier guys leave. They go to the draft. You replace them with blue-chip prospects. You see who emerges. So I think the big thing with Alabama this year, the intrigue, is just about procedurally what is different from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer and what it all looks like. And then ultimately what's going to happen when Alabama starts playing games. I think there's a lot of interest in Alabama's fall camp just to see how the team is progressing. But I think most people are really just interested in watching Alabama play just to see what it looks like without Nick Saban on the sideline. So it's been interesting getting a chance to watch a lot of practices. We're going to get a chance to watch the full practice on Sunday. So that'll be a good opportunity to really get a gauge for where the team is at. But I think the biggest difference is just kind of the presence of Kalen DeBoer on the practice field. Like Nick Saban in the straw hat was an iconic figure in terms of just you knew where he was always at on the field at all times because of the straw hat. He doesn't really have, speaking on DeBoer, he really doesn't have anything, signature wise that he wears. So he just kind of, walks around the field. You kind of have to look for him to see where he's at. He's spending a lot of time with the defense. He's spending a lot of time with the offense. Obviously, he's an offensive-minded head coach. So there's a lot of changes, I think. And I am bullish on Alabama's team, not to spoil what we're going to kind of get into with the buy and the sell. But as far as expectations, they're very, very, very high. I did a fan survey a couple weeks ago, and 70% of the fan base expects Alabama to play for the SEC championship, and 70% expect Alabama to not only make the playoff, but at least win one game in the playoff this year. So I think the external expectations are probably a little bit different than internal. I think externally, a lot of people think that Alabama may take a step back. Internally, I think a lot of the fan base expects Alabama to continue to maintain that standard. I'm leaning more towards them kind of maintaining it, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens in a couple of weeks when they kick off.
Yeah, I'll be interested. One thing I kind of want to write about in the future at some point is where is the line of demarcation for the programs that will commemorate playoff experiences or playoff appearances in their stadiums and in their practice facilities, and which ones don't? Because that's a really interesting line. Alabama safely on the side of those who I think will not. Penn State, we'll see.
If you go 10-2, do you hang a banner now?
We'll see.
It depends on the school. Let me just speaking on Alabama, like inside their practice facility, there are two things hanging up on the walls. That's the SEC championships and the national championships. So there aren't any. Alabama's made the playoffs probably every year except for 1 or 2 years in the playoff era. I don't know how many it's been, but there aren't any like playoff appearance banners or anything like that in the facilities. It's winning the SEC and winning the national championship. So yeah, Alabama's going to be on the side of not hanging any banners for making the quarterfinals or the first round or anything like that.
Katie, the one thing I'm really interested in with Alabama's offense this year is you look at the quarterbacks that Kalen DeBoer has kind of built his major college resume on. Jake Haener, Michael Penix Jr., both at Indiana and Washington. Jalen Milroe is very different from those guys. I think Kalen is smart enough to not turn Jalen Milroe into a guy that he's not and be able to use his abilities that he does have with his legs. Certainly he's a good enough passer. I don't think he's on Michael Penix's level. What do you think this offense ultimately looks like with a guy that has such a different skill set than what we've seen Kalen DeBoer really flourish with previously?
Yeah, I think one thing is I think Alabama is going to lean a lot into the run game this year. You mentioned trying to turn Jalen Milroe into something that he's not. I think, ironically, if you look at last year's offense for large parts of the year, that's kind of what they were doing with Jalen Milroe. They were using him as more of a drop back passer. He was dropping back, especially early in the season, 30 plus times a game. There weren't a lot of RPOs. There weren't a lot of quarterback runs. There weren't a lot of quick passes. I think Kalen DeBoer is going to implement a lot of that into the scheme. And I think they're going to see Jalen Milroe, the runner, a lot more early in the season. They have a really, really good running back room, probably the strength of the team. So I would expect Alabama to lean a lot into the run game and then be able to kind of use the pass game off of that. So I still expect it to be an explosive offense. I think it'll be a very fast offense, especially at receiver. And I think it'll be, pretty explosive. So it's all built around Jalen Milroe. That's something different than last year where, again, like they weren't really building the system around him. It's been a full-on commitment to building everything around Jalen Milroe's strength. So the vertical passing game is a strength of his. We're going to see a lot of that, but I think you're going to see Bama operate a lot more in the short to middle part of the field compared to last year, and I think that's going to suit this offense well.
I thought it was interesting they didn't really flirt with the portal for a QB. I might have sniffed around a little bit, but maybe that's just me. Unfortunately, CJ Baxter not alone on the fall camp injury front. This week, Notre Dame's projected starting left tackle Charles Jagasaw out for the season, torn pectoral. That's again, it's just tough to see that kind of stuff. Nebraska also a bad week to be a Midwestern left tackle. Teddy Prochaska also lost to a season-ending injury. Tough for those guys. Hopefully they will get back and we'll be able to see them again next year. And of course, Jim Harbaugh, the sanctions came down not for the sign stealing stuff, but for the infamous cheeseburger. I'm actually okay with these rules. A lot of recruiting rules were not great, but the COVID shutdown rules, again, I think people see a lot of that through the lens of retrospective, but at the time you didn't know a lot, and there was a recruiting shutdown. You could not recruit off campus, and there have been a handful of programs that have gotten in trouble for doing so, and that's where Michigan is. But Jim Harbaugh, 1 year suspension, 4 year show cause. Fair question to ask. Would they have dropped the hammer like this if he was still the head coach at Michigan? I would say probably not. His lawyer, Tom Mars, released a pretty blistering statement on Wednesday afternoon. Basically compared it to getting in trouble from your high school for not signing your yearbook while you're in college. I'm not so sure that's the most perfect analogy. I would say it's more akin to parking tickets or something along those lines, that you definitely broke the rules, and the rules are there for a reason. But those punishments are pretty toothless when they're gone. I'm kind of torn on the NCAA punishments in general. I don't like punishing players that didn't have anything to do with it. I don't like postseason bans and all that stuff. But when you punish coaches that are gone or, fired and are at another level and are doing other things, it sort of feels like, well, what's the point? So the NCAA is in a tough spot. But the good news is they probably aren't going to face any antitrust lawsuits for these punishments. So call that a win for everybody. Before we get into all of the buying and selling and preseason brouhahas and all that stuff and position battles, let us know what's your favorite team's fall camp storyline. Anything you're keeping a close eye on, you can let us know. Give us a ring on our Until Saturday voicemail line at 316-462-9852. We love hearing from you guys. Leave us a voicemail. We'll play it on the podcast. You're mad we're only talking Penn State and Alabama today? Well, let us talk about your team. Leave us a voicemail and we will chat about whatever it is you want to talk about for your team's preseason storylines. So let's get to it. It's time for a new edition of Bear or Bull. I can't keep those straight on the market, so I'm just going to call them buy and sell. For those of you who have not heard this segment before, the three of us, myself, Kenny, and Audrey, have each come prepared with 4 programs that we are buying or selling this season based on the team's trajectory. We're going to reveal each team, explain why we are buying and selling, and then we will explain why the other one is an idiot. And a lot of this is based on where the current stock is, like the real stock market. There's a buy low, there's some buy high, some sell highs, maybe some buy highs. We'll see. Exactly. And of course, producer Cam has sound bites to reflect our bullishness or bearish position on those teams. One day I hope to know which one is good and which one is bad. I personally like both Bulls and Bears. I might have a team on my list that is a Bull. Shout out to the Bulls. But let's get going. Audrey, first on your list, who are you buying?
Well, I was teasing that Penn State, West Virginia week 1. I am buying West Virginia.
Hurry up, buy all of this now.
That's right. Get them right now while you can. I think you look at this, and to me, like, one, it's going to be a crazy game in Morgantown. Penn State's definitely dodging one by this being a noon kick and not a night game. But this is a West Virginia team that has a Heisman candidate at quarterback, and I feel like we're not talking enough about that, perhaps. I think you look at this team, and then you're like, okay, like, what's going to hold them back? Right. I feel like they've done a really nice job retooling through the portal, which is like always what West Virginia does. Right. Like, I feel like they're always making moves in the portal. And I just think this is a team. You look at it right now outside the coaches poll. They were, I believe, in the receiving votes category. So outside that top 25, this is a team that I think can really make some serious moves. Am I crazy?
No, I like that, actually. I think last year, Neil Brown was occupying the Billy Napier Memorial pre-fired hottest seat in America club. He coached himself off of the hot seat. The trajectory is great. I like CJ Donaldson. I'm not so sure about Heisman candidate at quarterback. I'm not maybe as high on that as you, but this is a team that nobody's talking about. I think their Vegas over/under is 6.5. I like the buy here. I might not buy as much as you would, but I'm in on the Mountaineers. I like what I saw from them last year, and they were a couple plays away from winning even more games than they did a season ago.
Mountaineers are going to get us rich. Is that what you're saying, Ubben? Is that what I heard?
I think we're going to get a decent return on the investment. I don't know about rich. I don't know if I see this as a boom, but I like it. Kenny, where are you at on the Mountaineers?
Yeah, what I was going to bring up about Neil Brown is just how many Power 5 teams would stick by a coach after 4 consecutive losing seasons. The patience by West Virginia's administration is being rewarded here. So I do like this play. You already mentioned that Neil Brown coached himself off the hot seat, which is nice. And something else that I like about West Virginia is if you look at their schedule, a lot of the consequential games they're getting at home. Audrey mentioned Penn State. They're getting Kansas at home. They're getting Iowa State at home. They're getting Kansas State at home. At the end of the year, closing it out, Baylor, UCF, 2 of their last 3 games are at home. So a lot of the games against the more marquee teams in the Big 12, a lot of swing games at home, which I like. And the Big 12 is pretty much wide open. I think that we think that Utah is a favorite. Kansas State, Iowa State are teams that are up there as well. But it's really a crapshoot. It's one that I think a lot of teams are going to be competing for. So I like West Virginia being a team that can kind of compete at the top of that conference and maybe make some noise this year.
I like this about the new Big 12 is that there's like a dozen teams that you can sit there and be like, I could see 10 wins maybe. And West Virginia is kind of one of those. I think math would suggest that probably 12 teams are not going to win 10 games in the Big 12 this year. But the league is so wide open and the margins are so small. I mean, the gap between 1 and 12, 13, 14 is not that high. Kenny, who is your first buy?
Okay, so understanding that this was about this season, this is a buy not only for this season, but for the years to come. And this is a 2-for-1 special for the fans to buy. I am buying the Iron Bowl. I'm buying
this stock, buy and buy as much as you can. Money.
I like it.
Money. Auburn and Alabama as a rivalry, and then individually buy stock into both of these teams. I think that there's a lot of conversation about what the Iron Bowl is going to be in the post-Saban era. And I think this opens the door for, if you're an Auburn fan or an Alabama hater, thinking to yourself, this is an opportunity for Auburn to kind of make some hay in this rivalry where it's kind of been dominated by Alabama in over the course of Saban's tenure. Hugh Freeze, proven recruiter. They had a top 10 class last year. They have a top 10 class this year. You two may not know this, but if you were to go to the top 10 recruits in the state of Alabama right now, 8 of them are committed to Auburn, 2 of them committed to Ohio State. So Auburn has overwhelming majority of the top players in the state of Alabama committed to the program in the 2025 cycle, stacking talent on top of a class last year. Hugh Freeze has proven that he can win in the SEC. So you might not see the returns on it this year, but this is a program that is trending up. On the Alabama side, Kalen DeBoer, obviously proven winner. Alabama has the number 2 recruiting class in the country. They're recruiting nationally at a pretty unprecedented rate for a coach that is replacing the greatest recruiter of all time and coming into a footprint where he's not from and not familiar with. Alabama has players committed, I believe, from 10 different states. They're killing it on the West Coast right now. Number 2 class, most 5-stars in the country committed, I believe. On the field, Alabama is going to be really good as well. So what is this rivalry going to look like moving forward? Is Auburn going to be able to sneak one in on Alabama this year in Kalen DeBoer's first year? Is Kalen DeBoer and Alabama going to continue that dominance in the Iron Bowl? I think both of these teams, though, are in a really good position to win a lot of games and contend not only this year and into the future. So I'm buying the Iron Bowl. I'm buying both of these programs this year and moving forward. And I feel like this is going to be a rivalry that's not going to take a step back to anybody in terms of the best rivalry in college football. So loving where both of these programs are at right now.
I think Chris Delcani probably disagrees with your assessment of college football's best rivalry. I don't know if I'm on board with this one for you. I need to see more from Peyton Thorne, and the expectations have been so high for Alabama that it feels like just there's got to be some sort of a natural lull in year one under Kalen DeBoer. Personnel, I think they'll be good, but not quite to the level that we've seen some previous Alabama teams where you're looking around and being like, I don't see a weakness. I think big picture, I agree with you that when Kalen DeBoer came in, all the questions were surrounding, can he recruit at an elite level? We mentioned it before. He took over Washington, and I think they were 17th in 24/7 talent composite. When he left, they were 23rd, I believe. That's not the the trajectory you want to see in terms of just pure recruiting, even for all the success on the field. So for him to have the kind of success that he's had in the recruiting trail, I think bodes well for him long term. But I think just in general, when you're taking over a spot at Alabama that has so many challenges in year one, I don't know that I'm going to buy high on the tide. I feel like it's a light sell for these guys, and we'll see, maybe buy the dip a year from now.
I'm glad you brought this up. I just want to say one more thing. Since we're on the topic of money, I want to give a shout out to the good people at BetMGM who we partner with on the show. Good people over there. These people are so good and they're so nice that if you were to go on their site right now, you can get Alabama making the playoffs at plus money. Plus 105 for Alabama making the playoff.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
People listening to this podcast, you both, our producer Cam, listen to your big homie Ken. Please put money on Alabama making the playoff. Please, please, please put some money on it. And in December, when Alabama makes the playoff, you'll be able to take that money and buy something nice around Christmas time for your husband, wife, son, daughter, cousin, nephew, niece, whoever it is. This is free money. And then come back, call the hotline, and thank your big homie Ken for making you some money on the college football season.
That's pretty spicy. To
quote our friend Ari Wasserman, free money. They're giving away free money.
That's always good. My first team, and I kind of can't believe I'm doing this. Give me the USC Trojans. Listen to me. Find them on the shelves. Buy everyone they've got.
Shut up and take my money.
This is a big time buy low. It can't be worse defensively. And despite they're replacing a lot on offense, I still have a ton of faith in Lincoln Riley. Are you aware that Spencer Rattler is the only quarterback he's ever had since arriving in Oklahoma in 2015 that did not throw for 30 touchdowns and 3,000 yards as a full-time starter? That's a nice baseline. That'll get you a statue at Penn State. It just gets you to be another dude.
Ubben, statues around here. That's a sensitive topic here.
Fair enough. Either way, there's questions about moving into the Big Ten, sure. But DeAnton Lynn was a game changer at UCLA. They went from number 87 in yards per play allowed to 10th in 1 year. UCLA was a disaster defensively. And USC is probably more talented across the board, even if they don't necessarily have a guy like Laiatu Latu kind of hanging around. So it's a buy low on USC. I think there's a lot of USC hate out there, a lot of soft. They bring in Matt Entz as their linebacker coach. I think he's going to be in a lot of those defensive meeting rooms. At the very least, I think you're going to have a USC offense that, despite all the questions, will be good to very good. I don't think they have the dudes to be elite this year, but they have a chance to really make a leap defensively. And so for that reason, give me the Trojans on a buy low. Kenny, am I crazy, or am I buying into the Lincoln Riley hype, or am I onto something?
You're a little crazy, but you're a little crazy. I mean, I like Lincoln Riley as a coach, offensive mind. I don't think the offense is going to take. I mean, it's going to take a step back, I think, from the number one pick, Caleb Williams. But I think they're going to be dynamic offensively. I like where he's going to be schematic. I like where he finally overhauled the defense, after a long time of kind of being loyal to Alex Grinchett and that staff. So I like the upgrade on the defensive side of the ball. I think where my skepticism comes from USC, and this doesn't really have, it's kind of correlated to this year, but really moving forward, is just a talent acquisition part of it. Mm-hmm. USC to me felt like a program that was supposed to be one of the ones that benefited the most from NIL. It was supposed to be, who doesn't want to come and live in Los Angeles and make money and be in a big market and live in nice weather? And if you look at where USC is doing on the recruiting trail, they had a really good class this first year. They moved back to 20th last year. They had the 18th class this year. They're not doing very well in state. It seems like players in California can't wait to leave California and move to the South and play for SEC programs. I think Lincoln Riley is going to have a good showing this year to kind of earn some goodwill back in terms of like recruiting his home state first, and then being able to go out and recruit nationally and get players to come in, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm not mad at a buy low, but just given all of the factors around it, I feel like I have to sell a little bit. At best, I would hold this stock, but I just can't quite buy in just yet.
You can hold it, and then it's going to go up, and then it's going to get really, really expensive. On the subject of Olympic stories, by the way, Audrey had a really good one on the artist formerly known as Steven Nedrozik, now known as Pommel Horse Guy. Audrey, that was a great story also on our Olympic coverage. I have a question for you, Audrey.
Mm-hmm.
you've covered the Big Ten a long time, and I think in the SEC, there's always this big talk of, oh, you're going to come in here and you're going to get slapped around. Texas A&M comes in, they win a Heisman Trophy in year one. They set the world on fire and change offense in the league. Missouri, albeit in a down SEC East, goes to 2 consecutive SEC championship games. The Big Ten, Nebraska, I think has been humbled a little bit, but the program was. I think it didn't really. I don't think that's because of the league. Their program's been in bad shape. Period. Yeah. What do you make of some of these programs? USC still trying to find its footing, but obviously Oregon, Washington. What are they in for? Is it when you see these things clash? Is the offensive innovation and open, wide open spaces and actual offensive strategy, is that going to affect the Big Ten more than the Big Ten bullies some of these teams coming? Where do you expect that to fall?
Yeah, it's different. One, I think you're crazy for buying USC. But 2, it's a different style, right? And I think, one, look at USC's schedule. It's absolutely crazy. They open up with LSU. Penn State goes out there. They play Michigan, right? They play Wisconsin. That's a very tough schedule for a team that we're still trying to figure out, right? Like Lincoln Riley, quarterback whisperer, is going to have to pull something out of a hat. Danton Lynn, former Nittany Lion, right? So I started covering him when he was playing here. So now I'm feeling really old when I was a student reporter and he was a defensive back here. But, I think there is something to the playing styles, right? It is different. If you put Oregon in a clash with Iowa, right? Like, just think about that for a second. Somebody's going to get frustrated, right? You're going to have these really good defenses that are going to be like, okay, we don't care about your high-powered offense. Like, you're going to play our style of football. One of the things I found interesting out at Big Ten Media Days was talking to some of these West Coast players. Ethan Garbers from UCLA comes to mind, a quarterback, and he's never played in the snow, right? Mm-hmm. The hits are going to feel a little bit different when these guys are playing in the snow. In fact, I think that in that way, it might favor the West Coast teams a little bit, because talking to some defensive linemen, they're like, yeah, in the cold, you don't really feel the impact, the blows as much. But there is something to that, Ubben, where I think you're getting clashing styles, obviously clashing fan bases, clashing cultures, right? We're all going to have to get sailgating in our lexicon.
Oh, yes.
Which is going to be like very cool to see, but also like extremely different. Penn State goes out to USC this year, so I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I think you guys are a little, David especially, you're a little crazy, I think, if you're buying into USC. I understand it can't get much worse, but whenever you think it can't get worse, David, that's when it can.
I just have a lot of faith. Audrey, which fan base do you want to yell at you for selling their stock?
Well, here we go. Now I'm going to curtail this by saying I am selling.
No curtailing.
Yeah. Well, here we go. Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon. I'm selling my stock.
Okay. So sell high. All right. Okay. Why are you skeptical about Oregon?
So here's the thing, right? First of all, I think Dylan Gabriel is a really, really good quarterback, right? Heisman front runner. I could not help when I was at Big Ten Media Days. I'm there talking to him. I did not realize he was as short as he was. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, there is no way this guy is like a big time quarterback. Just looking at him, the eye test, I was like, this for a second, Ubben, I will kid you not. Before they walked him to the podium, I was like, no, that's definitely not him. It looks like him, but there's no way that's him.
Well, we can't all be Drew Aller, Audrey.
Exactly. Right. Like I'm thinking like, I knew he wasn't very tall, but again, so I have that in the back of my mind. Right. On top of that, they're going to have to travel a lot of miles this year, right? I do think this is going to be interesting to see how many of these athletic programs are willing to share best practices on data in terms of sleep, what time they're leaving for games, when they're returning. I'm working on a story on it now. Some of the administrators are saying, oh yeah, and the best interest of our student athletes will share data. And me, the tenured Big Ten writer, my skepticism, I said, are you crazy? Like any perceived advantage, no team is going to share what day we're leaving to get to your destination, right? So I'm a little scared about Oregon just for the fact that it is a brave new world out here in the Big Ten for them. I also, Ubben, like, are we as a collective media, are we overhyping the travel component of this coast to coast conference? Because obviously they don't travel like the rest of us, right? Like it's different.
I think.
Am I crazy?
For football, maybe a little bit. I think if you have back-to-back trips, it might take a little bit. I think my hot take on the traveling stuff that I think people are underrating is going to the game. I don't think is that big of a deal necessarily. But I think especially if you're playing on the West Coast from the East Coast and you're coming back to the East Coast and you're getting in at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then you're just punting on that Sunday, depending on how you recover, I could see you having a couple slowish, not great days of practice, not great days of preparation. The thing I want to see is the teams that go coast to coast. What do they do the next week? How much is that hurting you the next week? Because I think you're right. I think the actual travel, you're hyped for the game. I'm not so sure, but can it affect your preparation for the following week if you are getting off schedule or your sleep is messed up? That's kind of where I am questioning. But I think to some degree it's probably overrated. But I want to see the teams if there's anybody that has back-to-back cross-country. I think they're trying to avoid that. But as we keep embracing these sort of bi-coastal leagues, I'm the ACC, the Big Ten, I think some of that stuff's gonna pop up. So I'm intrigued. But I that's where I'm at. I think the actual games, I don't think, but I think the recovery and preparation for games on the backside is what I want to see.
So here's my other tidbit to this sell Oregon right now. You're playing Ohio State and Michigan. So the new conference is not giving you any favors with that, right? You're getting the two heavy hitters out of the gate, which selfishly for us is going to be fun as fans of the sport. But I do feel for them in that regard.
Kenny, who are you selling for your first sell, and which fan base are you enraging right now?
Yeah, so this fan base is already upset, and they're possibly so upset with the op that's directly in front of them, they might not pay attention to the fact that I'm selling them. And I wanted to buy this team, I really did. But in light of what we've heard in the last few days, I have to sell the defending national champions, the Michigan Wolverines.
Okay.
If you see these guys on the shelf, just do yourself a favor and walk away.
That's disgusting.
Walk away, because there's a dark cloud hanging over this program. And if you get too close, it's going to start following you too. I mean, this sign stealing thing, it felt like one of those things where it was a big thing last year. And yes, a lot of the people that were a part of that, Connor Stallions, Jim Harbaugh, obviously are moving on. And it felt like this was going to be a chance for Michigan to kind of maybe reset some things and go into this, new regime, new era, and kind of, distance themselves from it. But it's continuing to follow them. There's this, the violations with Sharon Moore. There have been talks of a possible suspension, and whether or not he gets suspended or not for the first few games, the fact that there's a possibility of that lingering is going to be a distraction. And on top of what we're talking about with that, I think last year Michigan's team was so well equipped to deal with it because of the infrastructure of the team. You had an incredibly veteran team, a lot of seniors, 13 NFL draft picks. You had a lot of infrastructure and stability in terms of the coaching staff, the off-field personnel at Michigan. A lot of those pieces are gone now. Harbaugh, several assistants, some off-field staffers, strength and conditioning, a lot of the players, a lot of senior veteran leadership that were key parts of Michigan in 2021 when they made the playoffs, and then 22 and then 23 and so forth are now departed from the program. I understand that they have, some leaders and some great players on the roster at this moment. But I just kind of wonder about how this team with this new infrastructure and the new coaching staff and not that same presence of veteran leaders is going to handle this being a distraction, not only right now, but it's something that's going to carry over throughout the season. I think this is going to be an investigation that kind of lingers throughout the year, on top of the fact that they're going to get everybody's best shot, not only because they're the national champions, but just because of how Michigan's kind of been conducting business over the last few years. So a lot of questions, I think, it's on the roster. Now you have this sign stealing thing continuing to linger into the next year. So for those reasons, I have to sell some Michigan stock.
I'm with you, Kenny. I'm with you on selling Michigan. I think, I agree with you on a lot of the sort of ancillary issues outside of the program. But when you lose 100 NFL guys, Michigan, if you look at their 4-year recruiting average, I think they're like 13th nationally. Well, that makes it really hard to reload. They're not Georgia. where they're having number 1 and number 2 recruiting classes every single year, and you're ready to have guys step in. You lose a Jordan Davis and you replace him with a Nazir Stackhouse. That's not where Michigan is at right now. And certainly there's a lot of pieces there. Obviously Donovan Edwards, Kenneth Grant, but there's going to probably be some learning curve for Alex Orji. I like the potential that he's got, but I'm not sold on them as a team that can just sort of keep trucking and keep making everything look really easy in the Big Ten, unless they're playing an elite team. We'll see. I am skeptical. I think they can maybe sneak into the playoff, but I think it's going to be a bit of a rougher year. Audrey, what are your expectations for Michigan?
Perhaps we here are not talking enough about the quarterback situation. You mentioned Alex Orji. I think that to me is like, as much as we all love to debate last year, was JJ McCarthy any good? How good was he? And you and I, David, we had quite a few conversations about that. I do think like that might be the one glaring area that we're just all kind of glossing over, and we're like, yeah, Michigan, they'll figure it out. They have Donovan Edwards. We got to see this, right? Like, and we got to see Alex Orji in the spotlight and see how he responds. I do think to Kenny's point too, like it's kind of like you hear about in the NFL with the Super Bowl hangover, right? And everybody's going to give you their best shot because you are the national champs. It is very, very hard to repeat, right? We know that's going to be the case. I think Michigan's going to have a challenging time just cracking that playoff field. And by the way, Ohio State, they've been gunning for you now. Ryan Day's been stewing and been hitting the transfer portal like a madman.
They got the best roster in the country right now.
Yeah, it's like, to me, I struggle to see if where Michigan even stacks up in the Big Ten, right? Like I can see a world where Penn State is better than Michigan. But obviously Ohio State's a cut above everybody else. Then you have Oregon in there as well, which maybe is that number 2 team in the Big Ten, right? I would not be shocked if Michigan does not make the 12-team playoff field.
Yeah, I think if most things go right, Michigan reads like a 9-win team to me, and they'll probably be 7. But if you have a couple things go wrong, Orji throws a badly timed pick, your lines fall off more than you think. 7-8 wins is not the craziest thing in the world. So I'll be keeping my eye on the Wolverines. They're a bit of a wild card for me too. My first sell: the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. These guys, get them out of here.
I'm so cold.
Are we sure? Are we sure on Notre Dame? They may have already kind of solved their Jagasaw puzzle at left tackle there, but I get it on paper. I can see it. Riley Leonard comes in. Well, he didn't have as much talent around him at Duke, so he's obviously going to be better at Notre Dame. Mike Denbrock, he just coached a Heisman winner. I see it on paper, but expectation is really thing, and it feels like a playoff or type of year for the Irish. That can do a lot. That can weigh a team down. And their over-under on wins 10.5. This is a slight sell high. They don't have the toughest schedule in the world, but you go to A&M to start the season in a game that you can definitely lose, but you kind of have to win. Obviously, they still have Louisville, Florida State, USC on the road to close the season. Georgia Tech, don't sleep on the Yellow Jackets. I think they are a team that could be on the rise. They might be on my low-key buy list there. I'm just not so sure that Notre Dame is this quintessential top 5, top 6, top 7 team that people kind of want to see them as. I'm not fully on board with the Irish. Kenny, am I crazy? Am I a hater? Or are you with me on this?
Yeah, I'm with you on this a little bit. I think what Notre Dame is doing, obviously on the offensive side of the ball, the defense we know is stout, but this kind of revolving door a bit of transfer quarterbacks kind of coming in. Sam Hartman didn't deliver in the way that fans thought that he would. You're bringing in Riley Leonard, who had some good moments at Duke last year, but health is a concern, and it's still a concern going into fall camp. So this is kind of one of those situations where a lot of your season hinges on the quarterback, and he's not able to do as much as you probably would want him to do spring, summer, into fall camp. That's a concern. You're bringing up LSU, Mike Denbrock coming in. Yeah, he did coach Jaden Daniels, but there was also a really big component to what LSU had last year that I'm not sure Notre Dame has. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Howard Lacey, Mason Taylor, really, really high level NFL skill player, something that Notre Dame has struggled to recruit and develop for several years now, things that held back Brian Kelly when he was there as well, just having those athletes on the perimeter. So I need to see something from Notre Dame offensively for me to fully buy in that this is going to be some 11-1, 12-0 type year where they're going to make this, incredible run to the college football playoffs. So I'm with you on the skepticism there. I just need to see it. And I think Texas A&M is going to be a great case study because I feel like they're one of the more underrated teams in the SEC. So that challenge of that offense going up against Texas A&M's defense, a lot of really good players up front. Mike Elko coming in, defensive-minded coach. That's going to be a great case study, I think. So I'm with you on the Notre Dame skepticism.
Audrey, who is your next buy?
Well, because I live in State College and I'd like to be able to live here and show my face at the grocery store.
Let's go.
I am buying Penn State.
No, Audrey, don't do it. It's a trap. I've fallen into it many times.
It's a trap. I got to be able to show my face in the neighborhood. I got to be able to go to the grocery store. Got to be able to go to the bar. So here's why, though, right? If you buy them right now, that means you're taking a Penn State team that we don't really know what this offense is going to be like. And James Franklin really has not helped kind of squash any doubts by the phrasing around it. He keeps saying, well, it's not a completely new offense. It's going to be similar to what we've done in the past, which right away that
sounds like
red flags, right? But here's what my thinking is. This offense is going to be different. Dare I say it might even be exciting. Exciting Penn State offense. I have not said that often. I have not watched that often. I've watched more swinging gate 2-point conversion tries and 9 overtimes than any human should have to. But I do think that Andy Kotelnicki's onto something here. Again, on paper, this is a team with Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, got Julian Fleming, Harrison Wallace. Oh yeah, Drew Aller, your 5-star quarterback. This is now or never for Penn State. Right, this roster is going to reset after this year. You've got Abdul Carter, you've got Denai Dennis Sutton. This is a really, really talented roster. Oh yeah, they also don't have to play Michigan this year, so they make out a little bit that regard. Now, in terms of buying them, I am buying them to get into the playoff. I cannot buy them to win a game once they're in. Right,
well,
so that's kind of where we're at.
Count as winning a game?
I think if you're buying for them to get into the field, which means 10-2, right? Which, hey, if that's the bar, Ubben, we know Penn State can go 10-2, right? Like that's a given right now. Is that they can do it? But now this expanded Big Ten is going to get interesting. They go to USC, they go to Wisconsin. Oh yeah, Audrey, you said you're also buying West Virginia. Week 1, like it's going to be really interesting right out of the gate. But again, on paper, the excitement with a new offense. This is like OC number 5 or 6 during James Franklin's tenure. There's so many of them, I can barely keep their names straight at this point. Andy Kotelnicki has got to work some magic, and I think he can. So I'm buying Penn State, but also if I don't, Ubben, I can't show my face in public.
I want to buy Penn State. I want to be there with you, Audrey. I love all of the individual talent that you throw out there. I love those pieces. But here's what I'm scared of. This is what I'm scared of with Penn State. Is they remind me a lot of Clemson 2023. Well, they've got Kate Klubnik. They've got Will Shipley. They got all these pieces. And they're bringing in Garrett Riley, the hottest name that you can possibly have as an OC. Kotelnicki, probably on the short list of most influential offensive minds in the sport right now. But if you don't let the man cook, I fear that you're not going to love what shows up on the plate. And that makes me nervous. If Penn State comes out and they go 11-1, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised because of that talent. They got dudes. I like to see that. But if the offense is not that much better and it looks very similar and it looks like we have a meddling James Franklin instead of a James Franklin who's saying, I'm going to handle the administration stuff, the big picture stuff. You coach your offense, do that thing. Because that Clemson offense last year did not look anything like what TCU ran on the way to the national championship under Garrett Riley. That's where I'm scared of Penn State and what might happen. Kenny, what is your second buy?
I'm sticking in the SEC, and this is a team that David is very familiar with. I am buying stock in the Tennessee Volunteers. You saw what they did in 2022 in terms of having really, really good skill players and an explosive offense that powered them to that double-digit win season. But I think when they played Georgia, you saw the gap in the trenches and what you need along the line of scrimmage to really ascend as at the top-tier college football playoff contender. Move forward a couple of years, I feel like Tennessee has those ingredients of really good skill players and what you need in the trenches to contend for a college football playoff spot. I like what I saw out of Nico Amiolova against Iowa in the bowl game. I think he's going to continue to ascend. I think this is probably the deepest wide receiver core that Josh Heupel has had at Tennessee, just in terms of playable depth. They got 5 or 6 guys that I think are going to be able to contribute. You look at that defensive line, this is going to be a really stout group led by James Pierce, probably a consensus top 5 pick going into the draft this year. I like what Tennessee is cooking up. And also on the talent acquisition side, this is very quiet, but Tennessee is quietly recruiting quarterbacks just as well, if not better than anybody in college football right now. You think about Nico Amioleva. They had, I believe, Jake Merklinger in this past class, 4-star. They come back with Greg McIntyre, class of 2025 guy, top 100 player. A lot of teams wanted him. And then they get Faison Brandon, who is on some websites the number 1 player in the country in the 2026 class. So there is a proof of concept there with quarterbacks that Josh Heupel is selling, that teams are buying into. So I'm liking Tennessee where they are today and where they'll be tomorrow. This is a stock that's going to age very well, I think.
I like this pick, Kenny. I like this pick. I think people are sleeping on Tennessee a little bit. You look at the preseason poll, you look at the coaches poll, which dropped earlier this week. They both agreed. Tennessee 7th in the SEC. I don't think that's where Tennessee is going to finish in the SEC. I think they move up over probably they might take above Missouri. See what Ole Miss is. I like Tennessee here. I think it comes down to really a pretty simple fact, and that is that they have an upgraded quarterback. I think Nico Amiolova is a lot better than Joe Milton is. I think they could have played him last year. I think the coaching staff didn't want to press that button. I think that can do some weird things to your locker room if you do that. But I think they're going to have an upgraded quarterback, and that takes you a long, long way. Audrey, from where you're sitting, what do you make of the Vols?
I came with props today, Evan, because I thought maybe you would be the Tennessee guy taking them. This is what they give you when you enroll in a school's graduate program online and never step foot on the campus. They give you a pennant. So, yeah, no, I'm with you. I think this is really smart. I did not realize that when you said that, David, about 7th in the preseason poll. That is wild. That to me is absolutely insane. I think this is a Tennessee team that can push for and get in the playoff. So I would buy that right now. Because again, they got to let me be enrolled in the fall semester. I mean, if they make the playoff, I don't know if they'll be hanging banners for appearances there, but can I claim that as someone who's not a Tennessee fan, but who's paying some money to go? Can I claim that?
Tennessee would be very interesting in terms of my line of who would celebrate playoff appearances and who would not, because I think what you might have is the older fans who remember the 90s and Phil Fulmer and Johnny Majors before him sort of scoffing at the idea of celebrating playoff appearances. But the younger fans who lived through the trauma of Butch Jones and Derek Dooley and Jeremy Pruitt getting to celebrate a season like they had in 2022 and getting to the playoff, I think the younger fans would probably be okay with it. But I suppose some of that might matter with what happens in the playoff. If you win a game in advance and you lose a hard-fought game to a team that's just better than you, that's one thing. If you get to host a playoff game and get run off the field by Liberty or something, I can see them maybe being like, maybe we don't do that. We'll see.
Yeah, I think I actually think that they probably would. Just one thing, his George McIntyre, not Greg McIntyre, George McIntyre is the 2025 quarterback. So if you look at what they did in 23, 24, 25, 26, really good quarterback run there. There's actually some recent history that we can rely on as far as Tennessee claiming good seasons. In 2022, which I referenced, where they had that 10-win season where they beat Alabama and won the Orange Bowl, there was a commemorative book that came out at the end of that season titled Revivals: How Tennessee's Epic 2022 Delivered a Return to the Football Elite. A year where Tennessee did not win the SEC East or win the SEC, claimed that they returned to the elite of college football. So what is Tennessee going to do if they make the 12-team playoff? There probably is going to be a celebration of some sort. So I do think they probably would claim a college football playoff and commemorate that in some way.
Good vibes also coming off of a baseball national championship. My next buy, I got to do it. The Texas Longhorns. I love it. I want more of it. Buy them out of it. It's a bit of a buy high. I recognize this. That's a risky proposition. And I think you look at them and you say, well, you lose Tavondre Sweat. You lose the heart of your defensive line. You lose Xavier Worthy. You got 3 first-round picks that are off that team. But you look a little closer, you still have 4 offensive line starters back. Yes, you lose Xavier Worthy, you lose Jonathan Brooks. Obviously, we could talk about earlier in the show, you lose C.J. Baxter. But you still got Isaiah Bond and Amari Niblack, both from Alabama. Those guys are both really good players. Trey Moore, a great pickup at edge rusher, 17 and a half TFLs at UTSA last year. I think they're still going to be really good on the lines, and you can't underestimate having a third-year starter with Quinn Ewers at quarterback. I'd like, for him to be healthy. If he can be healthy the whole season, I think that definitely is a huge help for them to achieve what they can do. But if Texas follows up last year with last year's Big 12 title and playoff appearance, and they were pretty close to cracking the national championship game, I think they can do some similar things this year. And Steve Sarkisian is going to be able to do more in terms of play calling with that offense. When you have an experienced offensive line and an experienced quarterback, that opens things up for everybody. So give me the Longhorns to exceed already very high expectations, even in a new league. Kenny, is the SEC going to humble Texas, or does the echoes of last year's win in Tuscaloosa carry to 2024?
Yeah, I think I'm probably leaning a little bit more towards Texas being able to come in and be a dominant team. I'm not as bullish on Texas as you, just because I have just seen too many instances of Texas playing down to their competition. And we can even go back to last year where they did that. They had some scares against some teams that won 3 or 4 games, and they were in some games that they really shouldn't have been. And there's not going to be a Houston or a Wyoming, for example, that they're playing into the second half with. There's a heightened level of talent in the SEC across the board. There's going to be better teams. We've seen Texas, on average, lose 4 or 5 games a year. So I want to see Texas just step on teams that they're supposed to step on consistently before I really buy into them as a team that's going to be elite and that's going to be here to stay. But this year's Texas team, I'm high on. Obviously, Quinn Ewers coming back. Want to see the next step out of him. I think Isaiah Bond's due for a breakout year. Niblack is a good piece as well. I like what they're doing along the lines of scrimmage as well. So I like where Texas is at as a program, and I think that it's more likely that they take a Missouri route into the SEC and probably play for an SEC championship in the first or second year, than a Nebraska route where they come in and face some really bad growing pains.
I think it's interesting. Everybody in the Big 12 hated Texas, loved beating Texas. I mean this as a compliment, Texas. I truly do, even though it's not going to sound like it. I kind of think a lot of people in the SEC don't really care about you. And I think that will help you because everybody's got their own stuff going on. Arkansas hates you, but LSU's kind of whatever. Alabama's still got Auburn to hate all day, every day. You've got Oklahoma, you got Texas A&M. I kind of think you're just going to come in and you're not going to have a whole league that just relishes rubbing your nose in it. And that, I think, will be a little bit refreshing for these guys. Audrey, are we on your final sell? Is that where we're at? I think I got lost.
I've got a hold.
Okay, a hold.
I've got a hold.
Who are we holding?
So here's the thing. I was going to sell. And then I had this internal dialogue and thought, no, Audrey, I just hold. I'm holding on Kansas. I like to watch Jalen Daniels play football. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. My trepidation comes back to losing Andy Kotelnicki, right? We've been gassing the guy up all show. well, what happens now without him running this Kansas offense? To me, like, again, you don't take Daniels away and just say, okay, yeah, they're going to be bad. But I don't know. Have they hit their ceiling already? You can hear the dialogue that I'm bringing
too. He's got to stay healthy too.
It's a big if. So yeah, I wanted to sell him, but I'm holding on Kansas and holding out hope that Jalen Daniels stays healthy for a season.
If it makes them feel any better, they're extremely good on NCAA football 25. I played with them. Great. They're great. Kenny, where do you stand on the Jayhawks?
Yeah, I'm kind of buying Kansas a little bit. I like Jalen Daniels. I like what they're bringing back. Les Leipold, continuing to build there. So I'm a little higher on Kansas. I think I mentioned earlier the Big 12. It's just a crapshoot. It's a conference that anybody is going to be able to win and have success. So I'm a little higher on Kansas. And David, you mentioned it. As we all know, game rankings are the end all be all for the fans who listen and play 2K. 2K ratings come up in conversations about which player is better than that player. So Kansas being OP in the game is a very good omen for what they're going to do this season. I don't think we have time to talk about Colorado, but I like it where Kansas is at right now. I'm actually gonna buy their stock.
Okay, Kenny, who is your final sell?
So I have a hold as well, but this is going to be a hold that kind of sounds like a buy compared to where everybody is at on this program, but I am going to hold Florida stock.
I mean,
okay.
Let's just wait and see what happens
here. Let's just wait and see. And I understand the vibes are not great. I understand where it's at in terms of the schedule. Is obviously brutal. Some might say it might be the toughest that we've seen in college football in the modern era. But I'm going to reference our good friends at BetMGM again, who had them at 4.5 wins. I'm taking the over on that. And honestly, are we not sure that Florida can't hit the over in the first 5 games of the season? This is a team with a blue chip ratio that's 11th nationally. The only schools on this list are that are higher that they play this year are Georgia, Texas, and LSU. Look at their first 5 games of the season. They start with Miami. Miami is basically the same as Florida. They're a team that's kind of meddling right now. Their season could go either way. It's a true toss-up game. Then you have Stanford week 2. That should be a winnable game. Texas A&M in week 3. Yeah, Texas A&M is probably going to be favored. That's a first-year head coach, first road game in the SEC. That's a winnable game for Florida. They go to Mississippi State in week 4. New coaching staff. Florida's clearly a more talented team than them. That should be a win. And then UCF is a toss-up game in week 5, but Florida is more talented than they have them at home. So, yeah, there's a lot of question marks at Florida, but this is still a talented roster. There's a lot of swing games at the beginning of the year that I think could set the table. And I guarantee they're going to beat somebody in that murderer's row at the back end of the schedule that they're not supposed to beat. So let's just wait and see what happens with Florida. Let's not bury them quite yet. Graham Mertz, if you did a blind resume of his stats, they look good compared to some of the top quarterbacks in the SEC. They have DJ Lagway, who's an exciting prospect. So let's just give it a month before we sell on Florida stock. They might surprise some people in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season.
To me, it's a little bit like buying Blockbuster stock. You might buy a bunch, but if it doesn't work out, you're probably not going to be out too much, Kenny. So I it's okay. It's okay. I'm going to go with my last sell here. I feel bad. The NC State Wolfpack. These guys, get them out of here.
I'm so cold.
It did not go well last year with Robert Anae and Brennan Armstrong. I thought that reunion was going to pay off in a big way. They ranked 90th in offensive yards per play. Grayson McCall is kind of a similar fit there. He's a very similar player to Brennan Armstrong, but his trend lines without Jamie Chadwell were very bad. And I think you look at that marriage at Coastal Carolina, and it's a little bit like a Brady Belichick situation. And you look at what Jamie Chadwell has done since then with Caden Salter, and it looks like Belichick was the fuel behind that. Because you look at what Grayson McCall did last year, and he got hurt and wasn't able to finish the season and play like he wanted to. But he only played 7 games and threw more picks in those 7 games than he did the previous 2 seasons combined. I think Robert Anae is better than Tim Beck at Coastal, but This is a team that showed up in the preseason top 25 poll. I don't think I buy that. Their over-under is 8.5. They've kind of rotated winning 8 and 9 games. They've done that pretty perpetually under Dave Doran. But they have Tennessee and non-conference at a neutral site. They've got Clemson. They go to Clemson, North Carolina, and Cal. I think this could be a very below average year, 5 to 7 wins. It's definitely possible for NC State. I think more. I'm just not buying them as a preseason top 25 team. Audrey, am I being mean to the Wolfpack?
No, I think you put it diplomatically enough. I think some of us just need to understand the Pop-Tarts Bowl. You can't easily forget that, right? You haven't moved on from that. No, I think you hit the nail on the head with the Tennessee game, September 7th. That's what I was looking at that here, and I'm like, that's a tough. Like, how do you rally the troops after that week 2, right? And then, in a couple weeks, then you play Clemson. Like, that is a tough 2 weeks between the 7th and 21st, like a 2-week stretch in that regard to try and overcome that. No, I think you were nice enough about it, David. I think you were nice enough about selling this stock.
I want the McCall reboot to work, but I look at what he did without Jamie Chadwell, and I look at what Robert and I did with Brennan Armstrong, and I say, I don't know. I don't know if it's there. I don't know if it's there. I hope I'm wrong because I think it could be really, really fun. Chasing those guys around, making plays outside the pocket, but I don't see it. I don't see it. Kenny, any parting thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yeah, not mad at you selling North Carolina State. Quietly been one of the most consistent teams in college football. If you look at them, the last
it's
7, 8
crazy.
years,
It's crazy.
They're like a walking 9-win team, which
I laugh when their over-under was 8.5 because it's exactly right.
If you just said that off the cuff to somebody, like in the last 8 years, North Carolina State's been a walking 9-win team, they would be like, no, I need to look that up. So I feel like there's a natural regression there a little bit. But overall, I mean, this was a fun exercise. I think this is a good way to just kind of like survey the landscape and look at teams. And I'm very much looking forward to the fan bases clipping what we have to say and coming back and reminding us several months from now, whether good, bad, or otherwise, about how we feel about their teams.
Mm-hmm. Quick bonus pick before we get out of here. South Florida. Am I influenced slightly?
Yes.
By them being my dynasty team in college football 25? Yes. Yes, I am. I fully admit this. I was texting some people in South Florida on their staff, and I was noting that I love their team. But listen, Alex Golish inherited a very bad situation, but they've got Byron Brown. They've got Sean Atkins. They got a bunch of athletes on defense. The AAC is not what it once was. Trend lines pointing in the right direction. They close the season strong. Do not be surprised if South Florida pops up and flirts with that G5 playoff spot. They could really be due for a big breakthrough year, and they get that kind of interesting game. They go to Tuscaloosa. Is that week 2?
I was about to say, you heard it here first. David Ubben is predicting that South Florida is taking Alabama to the brink, just as they did a year ago. I know there were there were some factors at play, but I mean, outside of Auburn, did a team play Alabama tougher last year than South Florida? The answer would be no. So I like what they're building there. Brown is a dynamic quarterback, and I know that's the game that Alabama fans are looking forward to this year for sure. So that'll be a good early season test, I think, especially for Alabama's defense going up against him. So I like that pick.
Well, thank you. Listen, it's been a great episode. Audrey, thank you for joining us. Kenny, thank you for joining us. Always great to catch up with you guys. Follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, etc. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're going to be there. Subscribe, follow us, and of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like this video, get us over 10,000 subscribers. And of course, as always, leave us a message on our Until Saturday phone line. That is 316-462-9852. I'll say it again so you don't have to go back the 10 seconds on your podcast button. That's 316-462-9852. Let us know how you're feeling. You got any thoughts? Who do you hate? Who made you angry? Who do you love today? You got anything you want us to talk about? Hit us up on that voicemail line. We will be back on Tuesday with our Big 12 Power Draft preview with Sam Kahn, Justin Williams, and Bruce Feldman. Thank you again, Audrey, Kenny, and of course, you, the listener. Until next time, as always, bring back the turnover chain and keep it classy.